Hello. Today we will be going over my review of the learning standards for early childhood. We're going to be focusing specifically on Pennsylvania's learning standards. As you can see, the learning standards for early childhood include many different areas. In a K through 12 program, typically you have the math, the science, social studies, that kind of thing. In early learning, you also include areas of focus such as approaches to learning through play. We go over critical thinking and expression. That is touched upon in a K through 12 program. It's integrated into the rest of the curriculum. In early learning, that is actually an entire section of the standards. As well as really focusing on health and wellness, physical development, and a lot of that, the curriculum in those areas, basic hygiene and health for the students. So the foundation of early learning standards are based upon developmental standards. Basically, we are looking at, is this child developing at the rate that they should be? Is there anything that we can do to help them to develop at a faster rate, keep them on track with the majority of their peers? It's also based upon age-appropriate education standards. So basically, we're looking more along the lines of, can the child hold the pencil correctly? Are they using the right movements more than, are their letters perfect? Are they writing words? The early learning standards in Pennsylvania were written by the Office of Child Development and Early Learning, or OCDEL. And then after they were written, they were reviewed and feedback was provided by experts in the field. So these experts included individuals that were involved in higher education, people that were involved with early intervention, American Academy of Pediatrics. So they took the experts from those other fields and they had them review all of the information that they used to make these standards. And then they went back and changed the standards as needed to make sure that they were meeting all of the expectations of those experts. Each learning area is the subject matter that we're focusing on. Each of those are broken down into smaller subsections. Then each of those subsections includes a big idea or a learning objective and essential questions that you ask to meet that learning objective. The curriculum is a part to whole as far as we work with each small part until we meet the whole goal that we're working on. It is aligned to the standards to meet developmental as well as academic needs for the students. Here's an example of a standard and how it's broken down. So we start out with the learning area, which is the social and emotional development in this case. Then we move to the subsection. In this case, the subsection is self-awareness and self-management. Then we move on to the big idea. So at this point, we are talking about the understanding of self and the ability to regulate behaviors and emotions that are inextricably linked to learning and success. Then we move on to the essential questions. So basically, we are looking, how do I develop positive feelings about myself? And how do I express and manage my emotions? These questions are for the children. Obviously, your infants, toddlers, preschoolers aren't going to be able to read these questions themselves. So basically what we're doing when they put these questions into the standards is they are giving you something to base your future lessons on. This is what the child is trying to do in this standard. So even though the child's not reading these questions, we're putting ourselves into the child so that we can figure out how to help them meet these standards. So then the standard of this particular example is make connections between emotions and behavior. So when we set up our lesson plans, one of the standards that we will be looking at is making a connection between emotions and behaviors. It could be something as simple as the child's playing, somebody else takes the child's toy. Instead of the child biting that child, the child learns how to use their words. They learn that they're angry. So that's a way to make a connection between the emotion that they felt and the behavior that happened. So when we look at the content of these standards, they are actually designed for trained teachers as well as daycare workers, but they're also easy to follow for parents and home care providers. So basically, they're set up so that people that are trained as teachers can teach these children, move developmentally onto the next level or even academically, but they're also set up easy enough that a parent can follow them at home so that they have something to follow if they're trying to help their child move to the next level of, you know, something as simple as, can they jump? There are basic examples of ways to meet the standard in the standards book. And they are partially based on age-appropriate developmental standards. There are not lessons provided in these standards, just like a K through 12 standard. It's a standard for you to develop a lesson to meet. So there are some basic examples that a parent, a home care provider could follow so that they have a general idea of what they're trying to do. However, this is not the full curriculum. A full curriculum would provide them with that extra information that they're not getting out of the standards. As far as assessment goes, basic assessments are going to be the observations that are made by the adults, which would either be the teacher, the care provider, or the parent. Formal assessments are available in the form of a curriculum or an ages and stages questionnaire. So if you have a curriculum, you may have a more formal developmental assessment that you're going to follow. An ages and stages questionnaire is a developmental assessment. Here is a small excerpt of an ages and stages questionnaire. So basically, what you're looking at when you look at this is a number of questions that are used to determine the development of a child in relation to the other children of his or her age. So the questions will be answered with either yes, sometimes, or not yet. There is a simple scale that if you answer yes, the child is scored at a 10. If you answer sometimes, they're scored at a 5. If you answer not yet, they're scored at a 0. Once you tally up the totals for every question in each section, you will have a minimum score that the child is expected to meet in order to be considered developmentally, like they're going to be on the same developmental expectations as the rest of their peers. If the child fails to meet that minimum score, then interventions may be needed to help with the developmental shortcomings. At that point, it's best to have the child evaluated by a professional who is skilled in early intervention. It is not something that a parent or even a care provider without those particular skills should do on their own. My critique of the standards, basically the positives that I see that come out of the standards is they cover a large gamut of information. They're student-paced based on his or her development, which is a really good way to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the child within the constraints of what they're able to do as far as their development goes. The standards are meant to be a guide to help the adult help the child to meet the physical, emotional, and academic growth that is possible. They are also, in every standard, you're linking to another standard. There's none of them that stand alone, which will eventually lead to a really integrated curriculum. That's the best way for the child to be learning. Basically, they're learning everything all at the same time because it's not broken down into little bits and pieces. it's all integrated together. The negatives that I see out of the early learning standards, especially PA's early learning standards, are the lack of intervention options. If a child is not meeting those developmental or academic standards, there are very few options for intervention based on the standards alone. Some curriculums will build those interventions into their curriculum. For the most part, early intervention and early learning have not melded together. I see this as a problem for a lot of students, especially the ones that have minor problems that if they were given that chance for early intervention, they would be able to develop on the same level as the rest of their peers. But because they're not given that chance for that early intervention, I see that as an issue as far as what they'll be able to do in the future in their schooling. The other problem that I see is a consistency across the states. So basically, the early learning standards from Pennsylvania, the early learning standards from Ohio, and the early learning standards from West Virginia are all different. There are some things that are completely the same because developmentally, children develop on pretty much the same level no matter what state they live in. However, the expectations of each state are a little bit different. And so it's kind of like the Common Core of K through 12 students, how we have taken the standards across the United States and melded them together so that we could have a pretty consistent idea of where our children are going with each grade level. There's no consistency as far as what we expect of early learning. I think that there's still a lack of respect for early learning and early intervention, and this is what we